Okay, so welcome to another video, and this time we're going to actually be getting in and doing some actual painting, a little bit of mixing. This video took a lot longer than I expected to film. It ended up being a lot more footage than expected. I've had to edit it down from a couple hours down into what ended up being about 20 minutes. Still way longer than I expected, so I don't want to waste any time. Let's just get right into it. Coming up as soon as I can, we'll be adding a part 2 to this video. And we'll get the painting finished, but let's just dive right in. Okay, so this is my basic palette. White, titanium white. I mix in some cadmium orange, gives me this light color here. I mix in a little bit of raw sienna, and that's gonna give me my better flesh tone. I've got my cadmium red, my cadmium orange, and my yellow here. Those are gonna give me my variations of color in my skin. As I get darker and as I move into shadows, I add more sienna. I start cutting in a little bit more burnt sienna. I go into my raw umber, and then I cut in a little bit of the burnt umber when I go into blacks. Load my brush. And we're going to basically I like to lay down a whole layer of, in the areas where I'm painting, get a medium tone background that I like, and then I tend to work into it with some lights and darks. I like to have a few different tones mixed up on my palette ahead of time, and then I can mix between them, and then I can add my yellows and my reds accordingly as I go. I'm going to be adding a slightly darker tone down into this area. A bit of pink, a little bit of red, actually cadmium red. Just gonna blush up the cheeks a little bit in here. Of course, nothing that I do right now is permanent. Everything is malleable, everything can be changed, everything can be edited afterwards. It's just nice to start off with a good base. Now, one thing I'm noticing here is I've got a tone in here. It's not really going darker. So I'm actually gonna take a little bit of my sienna and actually mix a slightly darker version of this color here. A little bit of burnt sienna in here now. That's just going to help me increase the darks. I like to keep my brush fairly low on paint. Otherwise you get globs and you get too much paint in there, and pretty soon your balance of color is out. I do most of my mixing here I do it on the palette. Use a basic skin tone down here on the side of the face. We want a lot more shadow, so I've toned that down using the sienna. Now the thing is, when you're mixing paints and you're doing this, it's better to try and get your paints close to the tones before you put them on the canvas, because of course then you've got to balance it out. If it's too dark or too light, then you end up with a lot more paint on the canvas, and sometimes that's good. Nothing wrong with that. Sometimes it's just more than you want. So you got to watch that balance, that's all. Know how much paint you're putting on. sometimes I'll get in here and I'll scrape some off and then blot my brush. So normally I would always start with the eyes. I have no idea why I started with the skin. It's nice to get the eyes out of the way, although there are going to be lashes here which are going to overlap, so everybody's going to have their own routine about what they paint first, what they paint next. I think it's very common for people to start with the mouth, the nose, the eyes, and then work the flesh around it. In this case, I just didn't, and that's okay. Now, it's pretty common when you're shading eyes, this area right in here beside the eyes and over the cheekbone is usually a darker color. It just works out the way, that's the way shadows work. You've got the shadow from the arc of the eye. There's still a lot of shadow in the eye itself as well. And the light comes down, the brows cause a shadow, so you've got that section to remember about. Just a little bit blush on the cheeks on that side. Throw a little bit of red in there. Generally I'm still painting quite thin here. This is going to thicken up, this is going to add more paint on it as I go. One of the key notes as to showing you why it's too thick is I've got pencil grays coming through here still. Those are going to need to all be covered. You'll also notice here one of the drawbacks of painting up close and doing stuff like this and painting details. I constantly am rubbing my hand into the paint and smearing it over here, which is not a big deal right now because this is all white, but that's normally why I generally try and paint from left to right so that I'm not running my hand through. I have gotten some very serious parts where I've done a really intricate painting and I've gone to touch some stuff and run my hand up through it, and I had to end up either repainting it or get out the thinners and touch it up and clean it up and try and fix my mistakes. Okay, I want this dark. Now browns are a little bit darker and a little bit off color when I'm mixing them with the flesh tones, so they do make a little bit mud. So I've got to find the proper balance between color and mud. So sometimes when I go back into the lighter, I rinse my brush off with thinners just to try and maintain the right tone without bringing in that really dark sort of muddy color into my lights. Chin's a little wonky. I'm gonna make some more work on that chin. For the moment, what I want to do is I want to define the edge of the face here, especially now that I've actually done that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over. And what I want to do is I want to create my dark into here. I'm using the dark burnt sienna at the moment, and I'm just getting basically a rough line in here of the sienna. Okay, so basically that gives a color tone between a color that can be mixed even in with the flesh tones, and now I'm going to switch to an umber, and the umber is going to mix better. So basically flesh tone to sienna, sienna to umber, umber to black. And now I'm going to move to burnt umber. We just want a little bit of the umber. Now you don't always have to go down to black. You can use dark colors, which will always give the resemblance of black. This looks very black, but it's actually just a brown. But in the absence of any other black, it becomes the black. Now, you have to be careful with blacks. Once you set the standard for what your darkest color is, you can't get any darker than that. So you don't want to put blacks in right away. You want to wait until there's an actual purpose for creating such a deep, dark contrast. Okay, I don't want to get too carried away here with the dark, because we're going to be having some reflective light on that side as well. So we don't have to get too crazy. It will be painted over a little bit as we go. Flash in over here. Basically, neck moving into shadow. Now this dividing line between the dark and the flesh here is really sharp. And then we're going to go down and we're going to blend. Again, we're just pushing paint around. None of this is perfect yet. I'm sort of blocking in colors and spaces, and then I'll slowly move it where I want it as I go. Now another thing I use to my advantage is how wet or dry the paints are. If there's areas that I need that I'm not really liking because it's just the wrong tone, sometimes it's better to wait a day before I go back into it. That's just me. A lot of people like to just get in, but the problem that I have is I don't like the paint to become really thick. Okay, here's my basic palette. These are the colors that I use the most often. In fact, I use them in just about every painting that I do. Starting with the yellow ochre and the siennas and my umbers. Those are my basic browns, my tones. They give me all my different tonal ranges that I mix in with all my other colors. Titanium white, iron oxide black, my two standards for my light and dark. And into my cadmium colors, I have my reds, my orange, my yellows. Those can be mixed into just about any color. And into my Naples, which I use for really, really faded yellows. You'd be amazed at how often a Naples yellow will work, including things like teeth and different things like that. Now, they're not the only colors I use. I do have a plethora of different shades that I also bring into my paintings, depending on what my subject matter is. They range everything from quinacridones to cobalts to different levels of reds, greens, whatever. You know, I have a full range of colors as needed, but again, my main colors are my browns, my black, my white, and my red to yellow range. This is my selection of brushes. I have quite a few, obviously. You'll be amazed at how many brushes you go through. I'll be using probably anywhere from 5 to 15 brushes at a time, depending on the details, the shape, the intricacy of the painting that I'm working on at that moment. Basically, I have the large containers, which are full of tons of brushes, and then I usually keep a smaller one of the brushes that I'm using currently. So basically, I will tend to favor the brushes that I'm using. You know, I'll go, geez, I really need a a brush that is about this size, I'll go, oh geez, that one is perfect, and I'll start using it, and I'll just grow accustomed to using it. So when I'm done and I wash it up, I'll throw it in over here, because then I know I don't have to go rooting through here trying to find a good brush again. I've got one handy. But the truth is, it doesn't matter how many I get over here, I'm still reaching over here for more. It's kind of filtered out right now. A lot of times you'll look over here and you're gonna see 20, 30 brushes, and then it's time for me to take a handful and put them back over here. I've got my fine brushes. These ones are all a little bit, for more detail, you'll notice these are not like these ones. Majority of my brushes up here are very flats. They're hog hair bristles. I do have some softer bristles mixed in, and I will use those as well. And these ones here, this is just a cheap pack of brushes I bought at I think I spent $10 for a pack of brushes. You never know when you're just gonna need a brush for some quick blending. A lot of these are junk, they don't last very long, but it's always good to have something handy when you suddenly realize that your good one is worn out and you can't stop. So I just keep a sort of a selection on hand just for when I'm needed. And that's my whole range of brushes. It's not too crazy. Again, I use a palette knife. That's what I use for mixing just about everything that I need. I do that right on my palette. Down here, I have a drawer filled with palette knives. This is the only one I use. So, you know, everyone's gonna have their own preference on how they're gonna use stuff, but that's me, that's what I do. And I've got right up to more expensive brushes that, you know, cost me, you know, $80 a brush, but I tend to favor the little cheap hog hair bristles, which can range anywhere from $5 to $7 each. I just make sure I buy them regularly. Every time I go into the art store, I buy one or two to come out with, so that I can always have a couple in my can here that are fresh and unused for when I need them. Okay, so that's as far as I've gotten so far. We're going to finish this up in another video. In the meantime, I'm also probably going to upload a few very much shorter videos. I know that this has been very long, so thank you for coming and have an amazing day. Thanks.